Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon and welcome to the 1830 warehouse, which I know you've already been here for the morning, or most of you have. Isn't it amazing that this building is nearly 200 years old? Isn't that like for an industrial building to be this old? And here we are. And I'm not sure if you've had a chance to visit the Power Hall yet. I think it's on the agenda as part of today, if you haven't. And if you look around, as you look at all the machinery and all the cogs and stuff as you're walking around there, also notice the fantastic work the museum has done to recognise, the role of this city in, yes, urbanisation and industrialisation, but also the impact that's had on climate and nature in terms of the burning of mass fossil fuels. And I think it's a really nice touch that they've added in there. So absolutely delighted to be here this afternoon. It's really nice to be asked by the Communicate conference. And in the next 45 minutes, we're going to be considering landowners and land managers and how we communicate with them, which is all your expertise, not particularly mine, but placed within the overall theme of against the odds and how we can really build resilience, collaborations against all the challenges that are going on and the pressures, whether you're in urban areas or rural areas, or what did we call them before? Urban areas, urban areas, that kind of thing. And I think what we want to get out of the next 45 minutes is how we can get better at communicating with landowners and land managers, because we've all got this shared priority, haven't we, for nature, and it's about making sure that we're all on the same page. So I'm absolutely delighted. I'm Kieron, by the way. Should have said that. I'll move on to me in a minute. From an organisation called So the City. But I'm delighted to be joined here by Safia Gilder-Hodgson, who's from the Western Forest. And she'll tell you lots more about that in a minute, but I was absolutely astounded to read, a project encompassing some 2,500 hectares and wanting to plant 20 million trees by 2050. So you must be busy with your spades at the moment. That's amazing. It's also a pleasure to be joined by Alex Hubberstey, who's the Lancashire Peat Partnership Manager for the Wildlife Trust for Lancashire, Manchester and North Merseyside. So these guys are looking after some huge spatial areas with lots of landowners and whatnot. Just very quickly to introduce the session. Oh, and apologies, I should say actually that we've had a cancellation today if you're expecting someone called Nisba Hussain. Unfortunately, she can't be with us. But she's from an organisation probably on your agenda called Equal Links. So have a Google of them, and if there's anything you want to follow up with them, we can get those questions to them. So just a little bit about ourselves very, very quickly. So there's our strapline, and we're a social enterprise that are all about bringing nature and green space into cities and enhancing it. Part of my provocation for today, really, there's lots of talk about sustainable development and the benefits of nature in cities, but it's often a bit like that, isn't it? It's finding out the pressures of areas, it's finding out about conflicting uses, and also just quite simply who to ask to do the things you want to do. And so as an organisation, we started out around food growing, finding space in cities for food growing. There's a really bad pun there that we used to use, so I won't take any credit for that. But it's really about supporting community groups and schools, looking at the finite land we have in urban areas and making it productive. And obviously to grow food, we need nature, the pollinators, before we get even to considering about all the well-being and climate-related benefits and whatnot. Last 3 years, and it's really nice to see Tom here, wherever he is, worked with Tom on, this is Andy Burnham's part of his manifesto around the environment in Greater Manchester called the Green Spaces Fund. And it's all about addressing inequalities, so areas that have the highest deprivation, also, surprise, surprise, have the lowest access when it comes to green space and nature. So it's about making that fair, and it's about enabling community groups and community organisations like ourselves to do it. And obviously the key thing that they need to prove to the fund managers is that they have the blessing and the permission of the landowners and the land managers. And there starts a very long and difficult and convoluted process in some instances. But it's quite amazing, isn't it? You know, some of the work we've done in an urban area is looking at old abandoned bowling greens. You know, they're a finite resource where food can be grown and nature can happen. But wow, you know, this was one of the most successful projects funded under the Mayor's Green Spaces Fund. But the night before at midnight, we were still, after a 3 or 4 month, I think it was longer than that actually, still trying to get the permission to put on the form. It was very stressful and it's often not clear. And I think that's one of my themes of today is there's often sort of, whether it's letting go or there's a bit of trust issue there, like are these unknown community groups and organisations, are they going to be able to take our land and do something good with it, or is it all going to be anarchic? And that's a real barrier that we face. Yet I would say in 99% of the instances, there is an occasional example where things don't work, but more often than not, when we look back, they're fantastic. And certainly the case is that here. And I'd like you to remember this little building that's pictured, this cottage type one as well, because the fund was about taking on an old bowling green. It was bland, no nature. We did all the surveys. There was the odd magpie, I think, went on it. And then by funding it and bringing in site infrastructure and allowing access, suddenly the community could get in there and get involved and start bringing nature back into the heart of one of the most deprived areas of the city. Activities, engagement, well-being, nature climate awareness, children who have alleys filled with mattresses are finally able to get onto this land. And it all happened because we got the permission of the landowner, and it had been locked for years, this space. So important, but also quite stressful to make that happen. So now a place for community events. The mayor himself came down, planted some tulips this time last year, and it's a real community resource. But should it have been that traumatic to enable that to happen? Should the group have nearly walked away? Should the advisor organisations who support the group be pulling our hair out? It's probably why my hair's quite grey. It's not a simple process when it should be. We're short on time today. I'll send these slides round or they'll be circulated, but just look at this. You know, this is just brilliant quotes from young people about when you can get through all that, it's so worth it, isn't it? And there's many projects like these. The 103 that have been funded over the last 3 years to date across GM, but they only represent a quarter of the discussions, so about 1,000 odd or something like that we've had with groups about gaining permission. So it's such a long process and it takes so much time. Final thing before moving into the panellists, I thought you'd be interested in this as well, which kind of echoes my provocation around making things more simple, about boosting trust, taking all the hurdles and the barriers and the things that makes people want to give up. But we're also delivering this in Manchester, a People's Plan for Nature, which comes from David Attenborough's Save Our Wild Isles. And again, it's called the Nature Neighbourhoods, so the term's there, isn't it, about looking at a particular area in the city. And the group and the community, again, just want a place to create a market garden because they don't even have anywhere for a cup of coffee, let alone doing nature-based activities. And again, this is, you know, the asset transfers, the permission, the trust, who are the, you know, I'm kind of echoing the same points, but getting to that position is very difficult and drawn out. So what we've done to finish on this, hopefully to make life easier, is that the Mayor also asked us to create a Green and Blue Spaces Action Network where we've brought all the people that have suffered pain, but also those that have had really good successes, and we've brought them all into a network alongside professionals across the city. And we've got about 300 or 400 on it now, on the network. It's huge, and it's very much about action. And the reason I put this up on here, in case, I don't know where you're from, in case you have similar things, but our second event, when we were discussing what it should be, we'd done the first one all about what it is and how great it would be. The second one, we put land ownership and permissions as one of the things to discuss, an agenda item for 10 minutes from a 2-hour workshop. 2.5 hours later, we were still in the room. I could not get the attendees to shut up, which was brilliant, but they were scribbling away, sharing pain, and then we suddenly realised just how, you know, how catalytic this can be for projects, but also how brick wall it can be as well. So without further ado, that's me for now. I'm going to pull up a map. Yes, it worked. So I'm going to introduce Safia to maybe give us 5 minutes, 3 minutes, and tell you all about the Western Forest and also a provocation, if that's okay.
Yeah, hi everyone. So I'm Safia. Thank you, Kieron, for that introduction. So I'm the Partnerships Manager at Western Forest. So we're quite new to this space. So we're the new National Forest that was announced, the newest that was announced in 30 years. And it was a competition by the previous government to create a new National Forest that we did a submission for, and we were successful in winning. And it's a new kind of large-scale woodland and tree connectivity project. So it covers Gloucestershire, Wiltshire, and the west of England, and in total that's 3,000 square miles. And we have an ambition to plant 2,500 hectares of trees and woodland into that space, prioritising those priority areas that you can see in the green there. But what you can really see in this map actually is how diverse our area is and the landscape that we're trying to link up. So as you can see, it covers a lot of urban centres like Bristol and Gloucester and Swindon and Bath, all rich in heritage and industrialisation. They've all got real identities to them. But we're also 75% agricultural. And so we have a real opportunity to link this landscape up and transform it through trees at that kind of landscape scale approach that we know that we need for nature to recover. So I think my kind of statement at the start is that we have two kind of, I suppose, barriers or opportunities, depending on how you want to see them. So one is that the tree and woodland space is incredibly busy. There are a lot of organisations across the country, but especially in our area, that are already incredibly active and already knocking on the doors of landowners. And something that we really want to ensure that we don't do is continuously knock on the door and cause confusion for those landowners to engage in tree planting or woodland creation projects. So there's a real kind of internal communication opportunity that we need to work with our partners in ensuring that we are creating a simple new we're creating a simple opportunity for landowners to engage, and we're collaborating with each other to ensure that that communication to landowners externally is really well thought up and builds on the trust. And then kind of secondly, my statement would be that we really don't want them to muddy the waters. There are a lot of grants, there's a lot of opportunities for landowners to engage in trees and woodlands. And it can take years for trust to really develop, especially in the farming community. So something that we really want to do is ensure that we're building on that trust and not causing any complications, and really ensuring it's a partnerships project and we're creating collaboration, not competition. And something that we really have recognised as being new is that sometimes our funders, they want us to accelerate delivery and they want us to go out straight away and start planting the trees without further ado. But actually, what we've kind of come on reflection is that we need to take a step back. We need to learn from some of the really amazing projects that have happened across the country in terms of large-scale woodland creation, understand where the pinch points are, and then work with our kind of farming champions or people who represent those spaces to understand what's really needed and really make sure that our communication is really well thought out before we kind of, I suppose, expand, accelerate, and amplify what we're doing. So kind of my statement and my question would be, how do you create something new and meaningful without just adding to the noise?
Thank you, Safia. So this is a huge area. I'm not the best at geography, but Greater Manchester will fit somewhere in this. You've got such a massive area to look after, haven't you? So, Alex, tell us about North Manchester, Merseyside and Lancashire and the area you cover and the work you do. There's no slide for this area, so...
Yeah, no, thank you. So, yeah, as said, my name's Alex. I'm the Lancashire Peat Partnership Manager, which basically means that I oversee a lot of the upland peatland restoration that happens in the county. and that ranges from sort of the border with Cumbria all the way down into the Greater Manchester area. And if anyone's travelled down from further up north today, so Preston, Lancaster, that way, you'll have passed the West Pennine Moors, which is my office basically, so Winter Hill, Rivington, Angles Arc. And my role really is negotiating with landowners for to enable peatland restoration. And the land ownership picture is so complicated in this country that we have to work with multi-billion-pound organisations like United Utilities, the water company, small farmers. There's also shooting estates as well, and some local councils. And sort of my provocation for this is that it's such a dynamic field that you can't apply one method. It's not a one-size-fits-all thing. Talking with United Utilities, for example, we have to talk about water quality and carbon sequestration, but talking with a farmer, we have to talk about supporting livelihoods. So the traditional upland sheep landscape is not economically viable in the modern era when it's cheaper to get lamb from the other side of the world. And then you talk with local councils who a lot of the time want to do good stuff but just don't have the money. And the issue comes with what time do you invest into each landowner? And yes, there's low-hanging fruit, there's those easy wins. And it's sort of that, as it's been said by Safia, that building trust and how do we do this? And we can be seen at the Wildlife Trust, particularly when we were talking with farmers that were fleece-wearing tree huggers. And it's trying to come at it from a level of mutual understanding that they have their reasons for thinking that, we have our reasons for wanting this environmental restoration, and it's how do we find that middle ground where the maximum benefits occur that both parties are satisfied with.
Brilliant, thank you both. I've heard of tree huggers, but a fleece-wearing tree hugger is a whole new level. I love that. Okay, so I've just scribbled some stuff down here in terms of perspectives of the three of us, and sort of like some of the negative things. And I've got things written down like confusion that we've all mentioned, muddy waters, this murky sort of path to communicating properly. All three of us have mentioned complication, and we've all said how complicated it is. But then looking at some of the more positive adjectives and whatnot, so there's a desire for it being more simple, collaborative, I think you mentioned, Safia, and we've all mentioned trust. Like, trust is just so important, isn't it, in a marriage, in a neighbourhood, in a country. It underpins everything, and certainly I think we've all been saying that. And I think what we've also all been saying, in amongst all this noise and navigation, is an area for collaboration and negotiation, and one size, as you put it, Alex, certainly doesn't fit all. So all kinds of stuff going on there. What I'd like to invite from you guys is maybe if we have 3 to 5 minutes, if that's okay, and maybe you could, in your tables, start to build on what you've heard, any questions you might have, scribble them down, and then we'll reconvene in 2 or 3 minutes, and you can put some questions to us, which will also allow us to invite some points from the online audience as well, which I think are here today. So is that okay? We'll come back in about 2 or 3 minutes. Thank you.
I'll be ready to run over to anyone who's got questions when you...
Switches. Okay, sorry to interrupt such a busy room of chitter-chatter. And one thing I was just pondering then in the conversation with Safia and Alex, and it was something you said, Alex, at the end of during your provocation, was something about the need to balance things around carbon goals and that sort of thing, but also farmers and a livelihood and this incredible negotiation. But it's really all about the communication, isn't it? And about how that, to both parties, if we're looking at it like that, and how that comes across. And you mentioned also, Safia, earlier about not being in competition and collaboration, but there's also, I'm sure you've heard it, but there's sometimes a term called co-opetition where you can sort of cooperate to get there. So I'd like to ask you guys now, does anyone want to fire off with any questions you have of us, of the panellists, or would like to share in the room? We have a roving microphone here, so don't be scared. Over here, there's a gentleman.
I'm going to bring it over to Alan and say, if anyone's saying anything, if you can pop it in the mics, that'd be great. We've got lots of people joining us online, and they'd love to hear what you have to say as well.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Obviously, I work with Alex. I'll just tell everybody I do work with Alex. So what do you think the role is in communications in engaging with somebody like a farmer who's suspicious of you actually doing something on their land, or if the land you're trying to rent or buy?
Sure. I can do that for a bit, I think. So for a farmer, my statement has always been, or conversations that we've always had with farmers about tree planting is the past, and bad grants, bad kind of communication from DEFRA and other organisations that you should plant trees, and then they say, oh, you should take those trees out, and they just get into this real confusion of what to do, and then you just diminish the trust, and once that trust is gone, it's over. So for me, at the moment, working with farmers is that we've actually gone to multiple kind of member representatives, so CLA, NFU, farmer clusters. We have quite a lot of farmer clusters, really fortunately, in the southwest. So those are clusters of farms who come together and want to do something good for nature recovery. So you might have a couple thousand hectares in this farmer cluster. And so you have your kind of champions that you then ask them, what does the dialogue need to be for us to sell tree planting for farmers? And I think for us, the communication has always been, we understand the climate resilience benefits of planting trees. We know that it improves soils. We know that it creates wildlife corridors. But what we now need to see is how it is economically viable. We need to really start looking at that business resilience, because farmers are producing. They are creating a business. They need that business to be profitable. So how do we change and shift that dialogue from our kind of nature recovery perspective to actually shifting the dialogue to how do we make sure that farms are going to have a yield that they can sell, whether they can have savings in terms of the savings on livestock with wood pasture or low density planting. So I think it's really a shift in the way that organisations like myself, like the Wildlife Trust, talk to farmers and make sure that we really understand that we need to make this viable for their business and that kind of longevity of that.
Yeah, and if I can build on that, it's that's such good points that you've said, is that the economics behind it comes down to that a lot of farmers, particularly with who I work with, as I've said, sheep farming isn't economically viable, the costs of farming are going up, and it's then talking to them about how a transition to some environmental stuff. I'm not saying take over the whole farm, I'm saying the odd field parcel, the moorland parcel, which is terrible grazing ground, but wonderful peatland restoration area. But it's, in every case with communication, there will be, in a group, in a locality, in a community, there will be one or two that are willing to take that risk. And if the bulk of farmers don't trust what we have to say as conservationists, now, I come from a farming background. I'm lucky enough that I can talk shop with some of the farmers, and that sort of sets the mind at ease a bit. For some people, that's not the case. So it's finding that farmer that's willing to take that jump and working with them and letting them become the champion and let farmers talk to farmers. And that is such a big thing that they'll listen to one of their own, as it were.
Yeah. And there's been a lot of kind of test and trials of that, and always in terms of communicating with farmers, peer-to-peer learning is always the best approach. And because word of mouth is the most important way of communicating good kind of projects to others.
Thank you both. Again, just in my geeky way, I've written down words that came up again: confusion, complication, and trust. So 2 to address and 1 to build on there, and that's what I'm going to pose to the audience. So thank you for your question. Anyone else or anyone online would like to chip in? There's a lady here in the middle.
We've got a
Yeah, very loud. As communicators, do you think there's enough of that best practice sharing amongst us? How can we do that better? Because I think it is very localized, isn't it? And it's about those relationships and about those trusts and about being on the ground. But I think kind of that one step removed of kind of those that like we said, it's very, very busy, and lots of people are trying to communicate with farmers and land managers. But actually, is there enough of that best practice sharing? Is there enough of that learning amongst us to enable that and to help that?
Okay, Alex, can I invite you if...
Yeah, of course. No, that's a really interesting question. I think in terms of sharing best practice, it's that not trying to step on people's toes and sort of taking that retrospective look at what has worked. Now, if we take the example, again, of farmers, a lot of farmers don't necessarily use social media, or a lot of them don't look at their phones. I know a lot of farmers still have flip phones. So it's what method might work for them is communicating in a local community event or something smaller scale like that, and a big organisation like United Utilities on the other end of the scale, they are a lot more public facing. So I think when trying to find things that work, it's that retrospective look at what's gone before. Is there anybody doing that now? And to help not muddy the waters, complicate things, the words keep coming up, is if someone's talking to a farmer about one thing, don't then come in with something completely different, even if it's with good intentions and everything. If say Safia was talking to a farmer about trees, I wouldn't then come in and talk about peat bog restoration, because it just adds that complication. So it's just looking back at what's worked, what hasn't worked, and adapting for the future.
Thank you, Alex. Safia, any?
Yeah, just kind of, I suppose, do we communicate outside of our kind of localized areas and understand best practice elsewhere? I don't think we actually do at the moment. And I think something that's been a real opportunity being new has been that we've actually been able to talk to a lot of kind of other woodland projects that sit on the national scale and really understand kind of where those pinch points were in terms of what we shouldn't do, and then opportunities and best practice that has worked in their space. So an example for us is that we all visited Forest for Cornwall down in Cornwall, and they do a lot of trees on farms, and they've kind of become quite pioneers about it. And we went to quite a few of their farms, which are their kind of farming champions and demonstration sites. And I think this was a real opportunity for us to step outside of our area and learn how things have been successful elsewhere. And I think that there's a real opportunity that everyone in this space really wants to engage with everyone, and actually we've all got some really great ideas and they can be mirrored elsewhere, but I don't necessarily think we create those connections and networks actually that enable that sharing of best practice. So I think that's a real opportunity for organisations, both communicators but also NGOs, to kind of look outside of their region and create new networks.
Yeah, and echoing what you said earlier, Safia, and thank you for that. You mentioned collaboration earlier, and often we've certainly found it in the nature neighbourhoods projects I flashed up before, the People's Plan for Nature, it's amazing how much more gets done positively and quicker when you have all walks of life round a table rather than just one camp pushing for this and another camp saying no. When you co-design it, it really works in that way. So as much as I love the term, I'm going to move us on from fleece-wearing, tree-hugging farmers into other land owners or other sectors. So is there another question, please, from the audience or online that we can maybe consider? Lady at the back, please.
I don't know if this is exactly with what you just asked.
Oh, sorry, sorry, far away.
Something that we talked about on the table was the value of local knowledge and that farmers have. How do you balance that, obviously coming from whether that's peat restoration or planting trees, that these organisations come with an agenda and I'm here to try and convince this person or get them on board. How do you balance that with the fact that these farmers have probably lived there for multiple generations and really know the land, and I guess the balance between the knowledge and the concerns of farmers and stakeholders with our agendas?
I have a kind of a short answer, I think, because actually a lot of what we have talked about with the Western Forest is this kind of deep heritage and stories kind of trees and woodlands embedded in the landscape. And I think you're really right, like there are generations of farmers who have worked on that land. And I think actually they're not always I think sometimes we put farmers as the barrier, but actually they have a lot of history and understanding of the landscape and how to care and look after the land. And actually it's an opportunity for us not to just shout what we want in our KPIs, but actually listen to them. And normally what will come out are these amazing stories of how grandparents or others or other parts of the community have sometimes used to go to this one kind of ancient tree and sit around it, or the owl that travels between the different trees. They have a real rich understanding of the landscape and history. And so I think the way in which we can share those stories and share that kind of narrative and make them more, I suppose, using farmers as kind of our audience at the moment, but using their stories to really showcase how they are carers of the land is really important when communicating how they are working with us as organisations.
Yeah, that pretty much the same answer, but sort of expanding it out from just farmers and other people who have sort of an intimate knowledge of the land that I encounter on a relatively regular basis is gamekeepers. So some of the land I have worked on, that we've done restoration projects on, is a grouse shoot. Now, whether you understand grouse shooting, whether you're against it, whether you're for it, whatever, there is still that middle ground, and these people come to it with, well, we think we need to manage the land by doing X thing, and that is usually burning for heather. But it's then finding that conversation, that middle ground, where it's like, well, I understand that, but why don't we try X thing over here? And they might say, well, no, actually, that's not a good area. We know that the peat's not deep enough over there, but we could do this area instead. So everyone who owns land, works on land, has an intimate knowledge of that land, and we're never going to get that such in-depth knowledge, because for us as practitioners or yourselves as communicators, you can't spend every day of your life on that land, but you can find those points, those stories that are really nice to build on, and use those.
Yeah, and just quickly to add to that is a really good way of what we found when communicating with landowners, especially farmers, is actually looking at those kind of heritage maps or historic mapping that actually shows that there was a low density wood pasture kind of site here, and there was an ancient woodland here, and how amazing would it be to connect that landscape together through trees that are beneficial for that landowner and the purpose of that land at the moment. So I think we do have some really great resources that we can use to showcase that, and we have a lot of heritage traditional orchards in the West Country, and a lot of those no longer exist, but they we have maps to show that they did exist and where they were. And I think that connects really well to the landowner because they really care for that landscape.
I think that's a brilliant point, both of you, and particularly Safia there about heritage. And heritage does excite people, doesn't it? It is a talking point, and it's that classic thing, and particularly with this, with nature and the future of the planet and well-being and everything, that, you know, appreciate that past, to know where we're going and everything and what we can do. Also, just quickly before moving on to the next question, I'm not a communicator, or I'm not in the professional communicating world, and I think when you hear this is your industry, you often make a stereotype that it's just about you saying something and getting across your message. And you said it's about listening as well, isn't it? It's really important part of communicating is actually being able to listen. So I think that's a really key message. So there was a lady at the back who had a question, I think.
I'm going to bring in a couple from online first, if I can.
Of course, please. Yeah.
So lots of interesting questions. So Safia, a practical question for you about how you can recognise what's already in place when working in a new area. Some questions about practical ideas. So which media, which methods, which channels, what's the role of digital comms in communicating with landowners? And finally, you know, thinking about networks and coordination. Obviously, we've got a national network of communicators who communicate. How can networks like this or others help coordinate and help us to work better together? Then I'll hand over to Emily as well.
Thank you. So the first one there, did you get the first one? I missed it. Can you repeat the first one, please? The first question.
So the first one was for Safia, but I think relevant to all of us. How do you recognize what's already in place when you are working somewhere new? Second one about practical
I'm going to give
channels.
Safia a second to think about that. So practical points, Alex, or both of you, any practical responses?
Yeah, so sort of on that question, I know it was posed to Safia there, but so my role is as a partnership manager. So our partnership includes the local Rivers Trust, the Environment Agency, Natural England, United Utilities, local landowners, basically every conservation organisation that could possibly have any interest in the area we're working is a member of the Lancashire Peat Partnership. We have regular meetings, we update on things, and talking to each other. So we've had a case recently where on a piece of land, it turns out the Rivers Trust was actually already delivering some wader scrapes, so for small indentations in the ground to open up pools for wading birds. And that was an area that one project that I'm involved in had identified for re-wetting. And what we did there was, instead of coming in and going, whoa, ignore the scrapes, do re-wetting instead, is we found that middle ground. I spoke to the Rivers Trust who was dealing with it, and I said, like, can we use this and sort of build and enhance on each other's things? So it's knowing who's in the field and talking to people, but also events like this where many organisations come. The networking side of these events is such a good place to find out what other people are doing, get ideas, and it might be that you've been banging your head against a wall trying to communicate with someone, and just by a chance conversation with someone, you find that someone's done it and you go, oh my God, can I build on that? Can I work with you on this? So it's a bit of a dark art, but there are ways and means of understanding a better picture of who's working in the area.
Thank you, Alex.
Yeah.
Safia, so have you had a minute?
Yeah, I have. I've had a minute. No, it's a really great question because, as you can see, our geography is huge and there are so many partners at different scales already operating. And I think something that's really important is that we haven't started with a blank canvas. There is so much activity that has already existed in this area. We have 2 incredibly active community forests. I'm very fortunate that I used to work at one of those community forests, and therefore as their partnerships manager, so I have a very strong understanding of what already existed in the west of England. So something that has been really important, and one of the key aims of the Western Forest, is to now link up that activity and kind of have that knowledge exchange with Gloucestershire and Wiltshire. And we've been working a lot within their nature partnerships. in understanding and kind of do a scoping, I suppose, of the strategic groups that exist and kind of those larger landscape scale projects and who is involved in those, but also the delivery side of things. So actually what projects already do exist, and as I kind of said, there's an internal comms opportunity there because there are so many partners who have existing knowledge, and they really want to share to make sure that this is a success and this doesn't muddy that water. And so it's a lot of talking. It's just a lot of talking, it's a lot of meetings, it's a lot of going to events, it's a lot of going to community halls and understanding the community projects, and it's been the best part of this 8 months has been going to those kind of localized delivery kind of project areas to get a real understanding and really show yourself as and kind of, I suppose, embed yourself into that landscape that's already quite busy. We've been really fortunate. We've had the Wild Summit in Bristol, which was a huge national environmental event, and that really brought a lot of national kind of profile to the Western Forest, and we had a project there talking about agroforestry. So it's events like this and the networking that exists from this, there's a lot of energy, and we basically tap into that and then try and track it, and it's also partly in my head.
Well, please let us know if there's another Wild Summit coming up. That sounds fantastic. And I've also just scribbled down here another term that keeps coming up today. I don't know if there's anything in this, but it's almost the metaphor of muddying waters or muddy waters, if there's something in what comes out of today to clear those waters, so to speak. Yeah. So we've got about 3 minutes left. I think that's enough for perhaps one more question. There was a lady at the back, I think, if you still have yours.
Yes, sorry, I forgot I had the microphone then. I'm going to try and make this as succinct as possible because I've heard lots of more information since I first thought of the question. But it's effectively about working with local authorities. And when you were talking about the Bowling Green example and how amazing it is that you got permission to use that land. And I've done lots of projects with community groups before that have rely on like peppercorn rents from local authorities to be able to kind of use spaces. And also community projects that are going through things like community asset transfer, which is really interesting, very complex and very confusing process. And so I just kind of wanted to ask about how you begin to navigate working with local authorities when they have ever-shifting priorities, because I know I've worked with lots of projects who, as I said, rely on these community spaces at very low rents that often get taken away from them because of something shifting or because of them selling the land or whatever it might be. How you go about navigating that, if that's not too big a question.
Yeah, sure. Would you like me to start off quickly? Right, okay. So I think there's 8,000 people work in the local authority in the city that you're just in at the moment, and that's a lot of people, and with different agendas between departments, and you have almost like your farming champions, you have champion departments, be it population health or climate change, or neighbourhoods, and then you have other departments more around property, permissions and all the money bits, if you know what I mean. And so, you know, the practical thing when we started out was to try and identify a single point of contact, so you weren't lost and passed from pillar to post and different sector. But then I think the best thing has been getting champions, actually. We mentioned this word champions again, and getting advocates from a neighbourhoods team or from a population health team or someone who gets nature and its benefits to effectively work with you. And the only way you can do that is to communicate properly, involve them and make them feel part of team projects. And that is a way to certainly fast track. The other side of it is, I think, if it comes to that point, not being scared to reach out to your politicians, be they councillors, MPs, or mayors, because they are civil servants, and often community groups, ourselves included, can feel a little bit daunted. But at the end of the day, if you're doing what all the strategies say, and you're hitting a barrier, and you know you're not getting anywhere, there is certainly no harm in going high if it's done in the right way. That all comes back to communication, of course, because people can get quite frustrated and you know, there's a whole art to keep making sure their communication keeps polite, kind, and productive. So that's what I'd say very quickly. Does any of you guys, just by conclusion, because we are at 2:15 now, just to wrap up today, or...
I'm going to put when I used to work for the community forest, because they've had a really good relationship with the 4 local authorities that cover the Forest of Avon. We provided them with a grant, and we also connected with the communities that wanted to maybe do something on council-owned land. And I think that something that's really great is to kind of have a charity like the Forest of Avon, or to then work to be kind of the communication kind of, I suppose, mediator between the council and the community to ensure that things can keep moving. And so I think that that's a really important part of communication, is not necessarily that the community are having the main conversations with the councils, because you don't know which person you're going to speak to, and they do everything so siloed, and it can take a lot of time because there are just different barriers and resource issues with councils. So how can you kind of, I suppose, as a charity, as the Forest of Avon, we've always kind of been like, how can we simplify it for the community to basically us to do all of that groundwork, and so the community just enjoy creating that space for nature.
Yeah, and sort of building on that, for one sort of concluding thing, is time is such a big thing that the general public, we know that you have to get them interested in 10 seconds or else they move on, but something like a local authority is a much, much slower beast, as it were. I've been in discussions with one local council about potentially setting up a new nature reserve, and we're now into about 1.5 years of negotiations, just because internal mechanisms are so slow. So it's understanding the time commitment that is going to be needed to communicate with those different people.
So thank you, Alex. Thank you, Safia. I've loved that conversation. And just to wrap up, I again wrote down mediator here, and it often seems quite negative, doesn't it? Mediating a problem. But I think you're exactly right. I think definitely if there's that role for someone to sort of balance the two. And the image, you touched on it there, Alex, about the slow-moving process of sometimes local authorities and communities wanting action now, as they should be. But there's one case we're dealing with where the community are like a fast-turning jet ski that's almost out of control, and the local authority are like this slow-moving tanker ship. And we're sort of there as the mediator in between, trying to, don't go so fast, but come on, speed up a bit, and keeping that dialogue going. So just to conclude, thank you all for listening. We'll be around for a cup of coffee, I think, to continue to keep to time. But I hope there's been some seeds there to start addressing muddy waters, confusion, complications, noise, all these sort of fleece wearers. I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing, but good in my book. And building on the things like collaboration, trust, and a simple future, we hope. So thank you so much for your contributions, and thank you for listening.